Welcome to the next lesson. How much inventory should you order? And here's what we'll be going over. The risk-reward relationship of ordering too much or too little inventory. Why you don't want to run out of inventory, but you likely will no matter what. The right way to think about purchasing inventory. Some best practices for calculating your initial inventory investment. An important Amazon update on inventory storage. And why having a freight forwarder is more important than ever. All new businesses, when placing their initial inventory order, and even existing ones when reordering products or purchasing new products, face the same dilemma. The more money you invest in your inventory order, the bigger the risk, but also the bigger the potential reward. So here's some things to keep in mind. Inventory is the sole source of revenue for this business, and running out of it is like closing the doors to your customers. And having more inventory also means faster growth, through the ability to have more promotions and continually selling. However, the risk is real and we all have the same fear. What if the inventory that we purchase doesn't sell and we're stuck with it? Keep in mind that's highly unlikely to happen as long as you follow the course and the product selection appropriately. The worst case scenario is that you can always do a fire sale and make most, if not all, of your money back. So the goal here is to find the right balance of reward versus calculated risk for you and your business. Here's another example of the risk we face. If your first product is selling 10 units a day at $10 per unit of profit, this is $700 a week in profit for you and your business. And if you run out of inventory and are out for a month, it's the same thing as losing or paying $2,800 because of the lost profits. So running out of inventory is also a risk. To help us get more comfortable with this, here's a different way of thinking about buying inventory. You're not spending money on inventory, you're investing in inventory and in your business. Take a look at this example. If you invest $3,500 in inventory, and then you sell all those units, and after all expenses and fees, you get back $5,500, that's $2,000 in profit, or a 57% return on your investment. And the goal with this business is to do that as many times as possible. So if you invest $100,000 in inventory and at the same return of 57%, that's a $57,000 profit or return on your investment. Now here are the main factors to keep in mind when determining your initial inventory investment. The minimum order quantity that you were able to negotiate with your supplier, your own financial situation, your tolerance for taking risk. Are you just wanting to play it safe, or do you want to try to grow faster? And also your level of confidence in your product versus the competition. However, there is a simple truth. More than likely, the quantity of your first inventory order will simply be the MOQ that you negotiated with your supplier, as long as you have the funds to do that. Even though we'd love to be able to try to order more or try to follow some other fancy formula, this is usually what most students do for the first order. You order the MOQ that you were able to negotiate. However, if you do have a higher tolerance for risk, a high level of confidence in your product, and the resources to do so, you might make the decision to purchase more inventory in order to grow even faster. Now, using the product criteria that we've been given, let's use some real numbers as a rule of thumb. 500 units for your initial inventory investment is a good goal, but it may not be feasible for more expensive products or if you simply cannot afford that much. And if you can't, that's totally fine. You can still be successful, you just might have to move at a little bit slower pace. But ordering 500 units will allow you to sell between 50 and 100 at a steep discount during your initial launch and also have a decent amount of inventory left over afterwards. You also need to keep in mind that you will need to spend some money on advertising both during your launch and after, and between $100 and $200 should be plenty for that. And you want to try to make sure that you don't run out of stock too soon after your launch, even though you eventually most likely will, and this is totally okay. We'll show you what to do when that happens. Now it's time to take action. Using what you learned in this lesson and what you've already negotiated with your supplier, determine how much you'll invest in your first inventory order. And once you've done that, head on over to the next slide to learn about two important Amazon updates on inventory limits. We don't want them to affect how much inventory you initially order, but you will need to be aware of them to determine exactly how much inventory you send to Amazon after your first order. In July of 2018, Amazon made two important FBA inventory changes. The first was how much inventory a new seller can store at FBA, and the second was how and when something called long-term storage fees are calculated. Prior to this date, all sellers had an unlimited amount of storage, and long-term storage fees were only assessed twice a year. Now, and since that date, sellers are allotted a certain amount of inventory space based upon something called an inventory performance index, and long-term storage fees are now assessed each month. Now let's talk about each one of those changes and how it affects us. Storage limits are now based upon the inventory performance index assigned to each seller by Amazon. The IPI is a rating anywhere from 0 to 1,000. It's based upon a whole bunch of calculations, but basically it has to do with your inventory performance at Amazon, how long your products sit there before they sell, and any seller with a score less than 350 or any new seller with no selling history at all is limited initially to 100 cubic feet of storage space. Your storage limit, however, is evaluated every quarter, and it's raised once your IPI rises above 350, which is actually pretty easy to do as long as you're just making a few sales each day. But this does present us with a challenge. It means that you may be limited as to how much of your initial inventory that you order that you can send to Amazon. However, 100 cubic feet is still a lot of space, so chances are this is not going to affect most people. Now, what's the solution if it does? What if you buy 5,000 units of a product and Amazon is only letting you send in a certain amount of those? Well, the solution to that is coming up. But first, let's also talk about long-term storage fees. On the 15th of each month, Amazon assesses a long-term storage fee on any inventory that's been at Amazon for longer than 6 months. And there's two different rates. Inventory that's been stored there for 6 to 12 months and inventory that's been stored there for longer than 12 months. If you want to see the exact rates, you can do a search of long-term storage fees inside of Seller Central. I don't want to put them here because that rate is always changing. Now, this also presents us with another challenge, and that's that you don't want to keep too much inventory at FBA if you're worried that your products are going to sit there and not sell for a very long time. So, what's the solution? The solution to both of these challenges is actually the same thing, using a freight forwarder. You can use a freight forwarder to store your excess inventory for you and then send it in Amazon when you ask them to do so. This allows you to order whatever amount of inventory you feel is right for your business without being limited at all by Amazon. And as another benefit, you can also save on any excess storage fees down the road. Now, here are some important notes to keep in mind. These two issues won't affect most sellers, but we wanted you to be aware of them in case they did and to have the solution should they affect you. For your first shipment to Amazon, you'll want to send in as much as they let you so that you have plenty of products for your product launch. And then, as your inventory starts to sell, you can then send in more inventory to Amazon from your freight forwarder's warehouse. Now, if you want to check out your inventory performance index, your storage limits, and any potential long-term storage fees down the road, you can see that on your inventory dashboard inside of Seller Central. Let's take a quick look at that. This is the dashboard right here. You go to it by going to Inventory, then Inventory Planning, and you'll see these tabs at the top. When you click on Performance, you can see the screen I'm showing you right here. This number right here is your IPI, your Inventory Performance Index. Down here is where you can see your limits if you have them. And then up here, if you want to check out any potential long-term storage fees, this is where you can actually see those. Now that's it for this lesson. So let's recap what we covered. We talked about the risk-reward relationship of ordering too much or too little inventory, why you don't want to run out of inventory, but you most likely will no matter what, the right way to think about purchasing inventory, some best practices for calculating your initial inventory investment, and why it's important to use a freight forwarder with a warehouse to help control your inventory levels at Amazon. And what's coming up? We're going to talk about picking your shipping method. So head on over and we'll see you in the next lesson.